Good afternoon. So this is the text of the Headmaster's Leavers Assembly that was given this morning, Saturday, July the 6th, 2024, to the class of 2024 here at Prior Park College. Now, a few weeks ago, we had our annual Alumni Day. After weeks of no sunshine at all, it was a glorious occasion, and I ended up a little sun-kissed. The quality of the cricket and the tennis played was first rate, and I was privileged to umpire for 80 overs. We had hundreds of alumni come back to visit their alma mater, and all had a great day. As the students in our chapel this morning left, they became alumni, the class of 24. The cricket and the tennis on display showed the Prior Park values in action. There was generosity in the way that the sports were played, with big smiles and laughs. There was curiosity about what their friends and their old teachers had been up to. There was courage in some of the performances, with high quality and high risk play marrying beautifully. Most of the time. However, not all those values were exhibited by all groups of alumni all of the time. There was a slight contrast between the various ages of the alumni that we had returned. Some were from 1994, some were from 2014, and some were slightly more recent leavers. Now, many under that banner of recent leavers may be known to some of you. They're a great bunch who did brilliantly here, and I love them all. But blimey, some of them were messy. You could tell wherever they'd been sitting through the course of that alumni day, they left rubbish everywhere. Empty beer bottles, used plates, cutlery, napkins, and they only cleared up after we had reminded them to, like they were in year 9 all over again. All the other groups of leavers left their areas tidy and clean. So what's the difference between those 48-year-olds, those 28-year-olds, and those more recent leavers? In short, I would say that those recent leavers aren't yet adults, but aren't quite children anymore. By 28, you've become a grown-up. This might be attributable to the end of the hormonal changes and brain development that marks adulthood proper, coming at around the age of 25. However, I think it's to do with the fact that as you get older, you stop living your life for yourself and you start to live it for others. This can be in high-minded and noble ways, like committing yourself to a life of service. For most, though, it's a consequence of realising that for any society to work, you need to think more about others and how your actions affect them than about yourself. That Prior Park value of generosity that we have spoken so much about over the last few years becomes more than a thing you are told matters. You start to live with more and more generosity, and you have the courage to put yourself second. This largely happens by beginning to act with more manners, with more grace, and by obeying certain rules of etiquette. Etiquette is an interesting word. It sounds French, and it is. It literally means ticket or card. It comes from a time when rules for how to behave properly were written on a small card. Now, this was useful when you were at the royal palace. France's absolute monarchs of the 17th and 18th century, like Louis XIV, loved a bit of etiquette. Louis was famously known as Le Roi Soleil, or the Sun King. Like the sun, he wanted everything to revolve around him and positioned himself at the centre of France and indeed the world. There's a famous saying attributed to him, "L'État, c'est moi," which means I am the state. Louis XIV used the rules of etiquette to control his nobles. At his palace at Versailles, 12 miles southwest of Paris, he imposed rules of behaviour to assert his supremacy. If you were at the palace, if you were in his presence, he determined what you wore, when you ate, how you ate, when you hunted, when you partied, and even when you slept. It was all written down on a little card, or ticket, and so manners became known as etiquette. Etiquette can be used to control people and can be a way for those in superior positions to maintain and strengthen those positions. However, for most people, most of the time, manners mean something a little different. They are vital to the functioning of social norms. Social norms are shared standards of acceptable behaviour by groups. In a broad sense, they underpin our society and all societies and how they function. They can be incredibly trivial and are often understood by people without ever being explicitly taught them. You just learn what you do in certain situations by observing what those around you do. Now, many leavers here today have learned to drive recently, or will be learning to drive right now. And I'd like you all to think about the social norms around driving. Some of them sit in the highway code, like the law that says that you shouldn't use your horn in a built-up area between 11:30 at night and 7 o'clock in the morning. Basically, don't use your horn when it might wake someone up. It's an example of a social norm, respecting the importance of other people's sleep. And that's moved from just being a social norm to becoming a legal restriction, part of the highway code. There are other driving norms, though, that don't appear anywhere in the highway code. Now think about what happens when you let someone go when you don't have to. Letting a car out at a junction perhaps, or a pedestrian cross the road when they're not at a designated crossing point. This is called yielding behaviour. Now there have been some brilliant sociological studies on what makes you more likely to yield to someone when you're driving a car. You are more likely to voluntarily yield your road position to a pedestrian who is either elderly or who has children with them. You are more likely to yield to a larger group of people than you are to a single person. These factors provide a brilliant example of what we mean by social norms. It would be socially unacceptable to not let a mother with a small child in tow cross the road in front of you. As a society, we value mothers, we value children, we value the elderly, but no law tells us to. We just do because of convention and what we think of as acceptable behaviour. Social norms can be used to nudge us into positive behaviour. Think about the signs close to schools encouraging you to slow down. They show young children and infants, even if it's a senior school. A sign which showed a lot of hooded teens crossing a road, not looking at the traffic whilst mindlessly scrolling through their TikTok reels, isn't going to have the same effect on slowing people down. In fact, it might make some grumpy folks speed up. Though I should probably point out, mowing teenagers down is definitely in breach of etiquette and of the law. I am interested in another driving convention though. When you have yielded, our social norms dictate that the person you've yielded to should wave in thanks. Now I don't know about any other drivers listening today, but when that doesn't happen, I get a little angry. At best, I will say to myself in the car, no, please don't worry, not a problem at all. At worst, I use language that should not be repeated here. The person has only not waved or not inclined their head to say thank you. They haven't insulted me or my family. They haven't spat on the car. However, it's rude. It breaks the social norms of our society, and it is not to be borne. Good manners matter. When manners aren't followed, it makes me cross. However, because I'm a believer in etiquette and good manners, that crossness is mostly kept to myself. I don't wind down the window of my car and shout abuse at someone for being rude. I try to follow the manners that our society dictates. I try to be polite. Back in the early 18th century, the 3rd Earl of Shaftesbury defined politeness as managing our words and actions so that people have a better opinion of us and themselves. That is, essentially, the aim of being polite. people should think better of you because of how you treat them. And they should think better of themselves. The modern day etiquette guide, Debrett's, states that etiquette is about feeling at ease and putting others at ease in a variety of social situations. Good manners are attractive and empowering, removing anxiety and minimising social difficulties or awkwardness. This notion of feeling at ease and putting others at ease is a good example of the golden rule, the principle of treating others as you would like them to treat you. This is something that good etiquette and most world religions have in common. The Jewish Talmud states, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to another." Confucius said, "That which you do not desire, do not do to others." The example of this tenet that will be most familiar to people today, though, is from the Christian New Testament. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 12, it says, "Always treat others as you would like them to treat you." It isn't a bad rule in life, and it is what most social norms, conventions, and etiquette are based upon. Now, in researching this assembly, I came across several translations of that phrase. As a lover of the English language, the biblical translation that most moves my soul is that of the King James Bible. T.S. Eliot spoke of the King James Bible's auditory imagination, a feeling for syllable and rhythm, penetrating far below the conscious levels of thought and feeling, invigorating every word. It's beautifully done, and unarguably the most important work ever written in the English language. When the King James Bible translates Matthew 7:12, it says, "Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them." This perhaps provides an example of where language might get you into trouble today. The more modern translation I used earlier does not specify a gender. The King James Version, though, talks of men, as if women didn't really figure in the teachings of Jesus. Etiquette used to dictate that men should treat women differently to how they would treat another man. My mother, who only turned 60 earlier this year, and so isn't exactly from a forgotten bygone age, insisted throughout my teenage years that I should always stand up when a woman entered the room, that I must always walk on the traffic side of the pavement when accompanying a woman, and that I should always open a car door for a woman, particularly her. Nowadays, I know several women who would take some offence at this sort of behaviour. It would be seen by them as patronising and as implying that they were somehow a weaker sex and in need of preferential treatment. So given that etiquette is about putting others at ease, what should one do? The answer is, I think, to try and judge each situation on its own merits. Stand up for a woman who would appreciate it, and stay resolutely bottom on chair when it could be perceived as somehow insulting. Equally though, those people who get annoyed by points of etiquette as exemplifying some fusty, old-fashioned or even patronising behaviour should not really be offended. They should display their own good manners and politely accept the gesture in the same spirit of generosity that it was offered. But it's clear that etiquette can be a little bit of a minefield. To all the soon-to-be alumni listening to this morning, I offer one small piece of etiquette advice relating to their teachers. We want you to come back to Prior Park regularly after you've left and tell us how you're doing. We want you to visit with your boyfriends, your girlfriends, your wives, your husbands, and eventually your children. We want you to always feel part of this community. However, when you do come back, think about what the etiquette of that situation requires and demands of you. Think about what makes you feel at ease and what would make your old teachers feel at ease. A few weeks ago, I went back to a school that I taught at for a decade, and a former student of mine was there, now working as a biology teacher. He is 28 years old. As soon as he saw me, he broke into a big smile and said, "Mr. Horan, how are you, sir?" Immediately I said, "James, you really don't have to call me sir anymore. Ben will do just fine." It broke the ice, and we fell into a chat about how he'd been and what he was now up to. I used to take visiting rugby teams back to the school that I went to as a boy, and I would coach against my old first 15 coach and my old deputy head, who were both totemic figures in my teenage life. It took me years to stop calling them sir and to start addressing them as Mike and Pat. They appreciated it, and they always offered me their forenames in reply with a laugh and a smile. So when you, the class of 24, come back to Prior Park and see your old teachers, call them by their full name or a more respectful title like Mrs. Trott or Mr. Bond. The rules of etiquette mean that you'll be putting them at ease by showing them that small bit of respect. Equally, those same rules of etiquette and manners mean that you can absolutely expect that they'll all try and put you at your ease by offering you the choice of calling them by a name or a nickname. So what's the message of this Leavers Assembly? It is, I suppose, this. Etiquette and manners matter. They help those around you feel at ease. They help our society to function smoothly. They help us all to get along. It can often feel as if the world is only one big disagreement away from total meltdown. I'm not going to advocate writing down a set of rules for how to behave on a small card in the manner of Ancien Regime France. I'm not going to urge you to follow the rules and conventions of what I think might matter to society. However, I hope, and I really hope, that you will all cleave to our college values, that you will have the curiosity to explore what you might do to make someone else feel more at ease, that you'll have the generosity to offer other people some of those gestures of etiquette and attempts at kindness that I've spoken about, even if it is an inconvenience to you. Above all else, I hope you'll have the courage to live a life focused on what you can do for others, not what others can do for you. Having a proper set of values will make the world a little bit better than it was when you found it. Values are precious. Having a core set of values makes you that much more valuable to everyone you interact with. You cannot ask much more from a life than that. Go out, make a difference, be of value to our world. You can do it. We believe in you. Have a wonderful summer.